Good evening, all. I'm going to talk to you today about management of chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. Now, chemotherapy-induced nausea vomiting is in fact the most feared side effect of chemotherapy. And if we talk of patients' perception, they in fact rank severe CINV near death. So it's that sinister. So these are the two most frequent and troubling side effects that patients can experience during chemotherapy, and they do interfere with the treatment compliance and the quality of life. Over the years, however, the treatment available to control nausea vomiting has improved significantly. However, control of anticipatory and delayed nausea vomiting still remains a significant problem. The causation of nausea vomiting induced by chemotherapy is multifactorial and is often very complicated. And there are different pathways that are involved, and they involve multiple neurotransmitters and their receptors. The CINV can be classified into 5 subtypes: the acute nausea vomiting, which occurs within a few minutes to up to 12 hours after chemotherapy; delayed one, which occurs beyond 24 hours; anticipatory, which in fact occurs before a cycle of chemotherapy as part of a conditioned response. It could also be breakthrough nausea vomiting, which occurs despite the preventive measures, and it could be refractory in some cases. And all these different classifications, the different types require different measures to manage them. Now, why is it so crucial to effectively control this CINV? It's very important because if left uncontrolled, it can lead to dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. It can also result in muscular effects, can result in malnutrition and esophageal tears. It can ultimately impair the health-related quality of life in cancer patients. It can sometimes result in discontinuation of the ongoing treatment, which can result ultimately in increase in morbidity and mortality due to cancer. It can result in the delay in discharge from the hospital and can ultimately increase the cost to the healthcare system. It's very important to be also aware of the various risk factors, which could be patient-related or treatment-related, which increase the risk of someone getting CINV. So if the patient is young, has susceptibility to motion sickness, has experienced CINV earlier, or is anxious, or has had emesis gravidarum, has impaired performance status, such a patient would be more at risk of CINV. There are different chemotherapy drugs with different emetogenic potential, which would affect the risk of CINV. Their dose and schedule would also affect the CINV. So it's very important to tailor the CINV treatment to keeping in mind these risk factors as well. Now, the chemotherapy drugs are classified into these 4 emetic risk groups: high, wherein the risk of CINV is greater than 90%. It could be moderate, wherein the risk is 30 to 90%. Low, if it's between 10 to 30%. And minimal emetogenic potential if the risk of CINV is less than 10%. And we have various classifications, and the drugs that are said to be having high emetic potential are enumerated here on this slide. And just to point a few: cisplatin, carboplatin, when used in the dose of AUC more than 4, the AC as is used in breast cancer treatment, they're all said to have high emetic potential. Moderate emetogenic potential is with the carboplatin in the dose less than 4 AUC, cyclophosphamide, oxaliplatin. These are the common drugs that we use with moderate emetic potential. Low emetogenic potential is said to be of taxanes and gemcitabine predominantly. And there are drugs such as vinca alkaloids which have minimal emetic potential. So it's very important to be aware. And similarly, we have classified the oral anti-cancer drugs also into those with moderate to high emetic potential and those with minimal or low emetic potential. For effectively managing the CINV, it's very important to be aware of the problem, the risk factors, as I have already enumerated, to know the emetogenic potential of the drug and use. And it's also very important to understand the pathophysiology behind the CINV. Talking about it briefly, we know that there are central mechanisms involving the chemoreceptor trigger zone, and there are peripheral mechanisms. and they both are in fact interdependent and interrelated. There are various neurotransmitters involved in this process, and this slide lists all those neurotransmitters. Most predominant among these are the serotonin, substance P, endorphins, histamine, dopamine, and acetylcholine. Now, we have different anti-MSS guidelines, namely the NCCN, ASCO, ESMO, and the Multinational Association of Supportive Care in Cancer. And my talk is based on these guidelines. Now, let's start in the reverse order. So if we are using a drug which has minimal emetogenic potential, no routine prophylaxis is warranted. If the drug has low emetic potential, one could use either steroid dexamethasone or metoclopramide or chlorperazine or a single 5-HT3 receptor antagonist. And this is also the same guidelines are issued by MASCC and ESMO as well, that minimally emetogenic chemotherapy does not warrant any prophylaxis. And low one warrants use of a single drug, either steroid, dexamethasone, or 5-HT3 receptor antagonist, or dopamine receptor antagonist such as metoclopramide. If we are worried about the delayed nausea vomiting in such a case with low or minimally emetogenic chemotherapy, actually nothing more needs to be done in addition. Coming to the moderate emetic potential chemotherapy drugs, for prevention of acute nausea vomiting, it is recommended that we combine a 5-HT3 receptor antagonist with dexamethasone. And for taking care of the delayed nausea vomiting due to moderately emetogenic chemotherapy, one can use dexamethasone on day 2 and 3 as well. Now, coming to the group of high emetic risk category, it is all the guidelines recommend a 3-drug regime, which consists of single dose of 5-HT3 receptor antagonist, dexamethasone, and neurokinin receptor antagonist, any one of them given before chemotherapy. Now, talking about the NK1 receptor antagonist, we have various forms available like aprepitant, fosaprepitant in the IV form, netipetant, and rolapitant. The netipetant is often administered in a fixed dose formulation. It's available in combination with pelonosetron, and this is very convenient and very effective antiemetic. To prevent the delayed nausea vomiting due to non-AC chemotherapy of high emetic risk, again, a 3-drug combination regime, as I've already highlighted, is recommended. In addition, dexamethasone is to be continued from day 2 to 4 to take care of the delayed nausea and vomiting. Now, for prevention of acute nausea vomiting due to AC-based chemotherapy, as in breast cancer, because this is said to have high emetic potential, again, a 3-drug regime, as already enumerated, is to be used. And for prevention of delayed nausea vomiting due to this, again, one could continue dexamethasone on day 2 and 3. And obviously, if aprepitant has been used, you will continue that also on day 2 and 3. However, if netipetant or fosaprepitant have been used on day 1, then nothing more needs to be done. Olanzapine is a very important adjunct to the treatment to take care of the delayed nausea and vomiting due to these drugs with high emetic potential. Now, what about patients who are receiving multiple day cisplatin? Again, it's recommended that these patients should receive 5-HT3 receptor antagonist and dexamethasone and aprepitant. And obviously, such a patient would get aprepitant on day 2 and 3 as well. What about those patients who are receiving high-dose chemotherapy prior to stem cell transplant? It is recommended to use a combination of 5-HT3 receptor antagonist with dexamethasone and aprepitant in this group of patients. What about breakthrough treatment, breakthrough nausea vomiting? The general principle that is recommended is to add another agent from a different class of drugs to the current ongoing regime. So one could use olanzapine, or one could add benzodiazepines such as lorazepam. One could also use drugs like metoclopramide or haloperidol. And there is some controversy about the use of cannabinoids, and I'll come to it shortly. For the prevention of anticipatory nausea and vomiting, the best approach is to prevent acute nausea. It's very important to prevent and control acute nausea vomiting to prevent anticipatory nausea and vomiting. And in addition to these drug measures, various behavioral therapies are also recommended, such as relaxation, hypnosis, guided imagery, music therapy, yoga, acupuncture or acupressure, etc. And also the use of anxiolytics to take care of the anticipatory nausea and vomiting. This slide shows the recommended doses, keeping in view mainly the cardiac side effects, QTc prolongation, which is possible due to this class of drugs, 5-HT3 receptor antagonists. So ondansetron, oral dose maximum 16 milligrams is recommended, IV. And pelonosetron, when used in IV formulation, 0.25 milligrams, and in oral, 0.5 milligrams. The recommended doses for dexamethasone depend on the emetogenic potential of the chemotherapy. If it's high risk, one could use 20 milligrams once, or to take care of the delayed one, 8 milligrams twice a day, continued over next 3 to 4 days is good enough. For moderate risk acute MSS, 8 milligrams once is good enough, and again continued for 2 to 3 days to take care of the delayed MSS. And low risk, one could reduce the dose to half. Coming to the recommended neurokinin 1 receptor antagonist dose, aprepitant, we all know, 125 milligrams on day 1 of the chemotherapy and 80 milligrams on day 2 and 3. And fosaprepitant is just given once on day 1 of the chemotherapy intravenously. And netipetant, as I've already mentioned, is available in fixed drug formation, along with 0.5 milligrams of pelonosetron, and only once before the chemo. Day of chemo is enough. So this slide summarizes the important international guidelines for control of acute nausea and vomiting, and triple drug regime or double drug regime, or even single agent for low emetic risk drugs. And for taking care of delayed nausea vomiting, it's very important to use drugs such as olanzapine. Now, what about if, despite all this, the patient has poorly controlled CINV? It's then important to exclude other factors, such as whether the patient is on opiate analgesics, is the patient on antibiotics such as erythromycin, has the patient developed CNS mets, or has gone into gastrointestinal obstruction, has the patient developed hypercalcemia, or is the patient also getting abdominopelvic radiotherapy? So one must look into all these factors as well. Now, other measures which may need to be undertaken is to adjust the regime that the patient has been on, and if not controlled on that, one could step up and one could use the higher risk group recommendations. Additionally, one could use benzodiazepines, olanzapine, or dopaminergic antagonists like haloperidol, or one could also substitute with high-dose intravenous metoclopramide. Now, rarely one may also need to alter the chemotherapy plan of the patient. However, one must keep in mind that one does not compromise the anti-tumor activity of the given treatment regime. So one could use single-day therapy instead of multiple-day protocols. One could also increase the infusion time to reduce the risk of CINV. What about marijuana and CBD oil? Now, because of the medical and legal concerns, the use of these drugs or agents is not recommended as yet for the management of CINV, and is currently not included in most recent guidelines. However, in that table that I showed of NCCN, it does list cannabinoids as one of the important adjunct measures. What about complementary therapies? So in 2018, ASCO did endorse the Society for Integrative Oncology evidence-based guideline for the use of various integrative therapies after breast cancer treatment, such as ginger in capsule form, acupressure, and electroacupuncture, in addition to antiemetic drugs to control nausea and vomiting during chemotherapy. Now, other non-pharmacological strategies which have also been studied and used occasionally to control CINV include cognitive distraction, systematic desensitization, exercise, hypnosis, and transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation. Thus, to end my talk, I would want to emphasize that in the cancer management of a given patient with cancer, besides the medical, surgical, and radiation oncology components of the treatment, control of CINV is very, very important and must never be, underplayed or underemphasized, because this ultimately does affect the quality of life and does ensure the very good control of CINV, does ensure good compliance with the very important anti-cancer treatment.